Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Espis. Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 9th of March 2024. I want to start before I get to the military aid and military equipment segment, which will be, I think, the entirety of this video. I want to talk about something I mentioned in the previous video, supposedly an S-300 launcher has hit. Well, it's also worth noting that not a single Russian naval ship is on combat duty in the Black Sea again, as reported by the naval forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. By engaging the Black Sea pirates in battle, says Michael McKay, Ukrainians secure freedom of navigation. Why are Americans and others so afraid? So that's his chance to have a bit of a rant. But no Black Sea fleet vessels on combat duty is an incredible behavioural shift by the Russian Navy in answer to the repeated strikes on Russian vessels. Right, now going to Ukrainian military aid or military aid for Ukraine and military equipment, and then moving on to a few bits and pieces for Russia. Right, the French Minister of Defense, Sébastien Lecornu, stated today, or that'd be yesterday, that new methods need to be discussed to combat the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but that the deployment of NATO ground troops is off the table for now. This appears to be walking back what the French President Macron said last week, which is the deployment of ground troops was never off the table and should be considered. There's a little bit of confusion going on there. I think this is just like containing people's angst or excitement that, you know what, French troops aren't going to go right now, but it's something we are thinking about. It's something we're going to be planning for. We can't let Russia dictate the red lines of this conflict. Sometimes we need to take, well, actually all the time, we need to take the red lines to Russia. If you do this, then we'll commit troops to Ukraine. And I think, yeah, that's important for us to do that, and Macron is doing that, but he's not the only one. So Polish government now saying that they can conceive of NATO forces in Ukraine. War is a dynamic process that can lead to dramatic changes. It's amazing that so many people cannot see that such a development is becoming more and more possible, says Phillips O'Brien. And this is in answer to the presence of NATO forces in Ukraine not being unthinkable. I appreciate, and this is coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Poland directly. The NATO forces in Ukraine is not unthinkable. I appreciate that the French President Macron's initiative, because it is about Putin being afraid, not us being afraid of Putin. That is huge, and that's Sikorsky, who I think is brilliant. The foreign minister there. Russia proved civilizationally incapable of adopting our values despite our repeated encouragement. We had to return to the original role of NATO. Russians have defined themselves as a country that cannot live in peace with its neighbors. Now, the presence of Western troops in Ukraine is not something unthinkable. He said that on March 8th, so that's yesterday, at a conference in the Polish Sejm. So that's in the Polish Parliament on the 25th anniversary of Poland's membership of NATO. Remember, quote, remember at the UN General Assembly immediately after the invasion, more than 140 countries out of 190 voted to condemn the aggression as unacceptable. That is why I appreciate the French initiative of the last few days, because I think it's a good intention, namely that it is Russian President who should be asking himself what our next step will be, and not that he should be sure that he will not do anything creative and therefore he can plan his scenarios. In other words, he needs to be reacting to what we do rather than us always in reactive mode to what Russia does, to what the Kremlin does, to what Putin does. This is really good news from Poland. And Ukraine themselves have said they are open to NATO military presence, and of course they're going to say this. Their national security chief, Danilov, has said earlier French President Macron and Polish Foreign Minister Sikorsky suggested that deploying Western troops to Ukraine is a possibility that should not be discounted. And you can add to that Canada saying the same, and a number of the Baltic states also saying that. It's really significant. Now, Pedro Sanchez is a disappointment, says PS01, and Scholz relying on Fitzo tells you all you need to know about Scholz. Okay, so what's going on here? So, according to Le Monde, French newspaper, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, has, quote, formed a united front with Pedro Sanchez, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, and Robert Fitzo. So we've got Greek, and we have Slovakian, and is that Spanish? to nip in the bud the debate launched by Emmanuel Macron on sending Western soldiers to Ukraine. So, on the one hand, there's this movement to not have this off the table, to have this as a potential option, to take this war to Russia in terms of setting out red lines and setting out expectations. And on the other hand, we have some European leaders who fundamentally disagree with that, saying no, 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 no. And there's a united front with those people, and that's really disappointing that Robert Fico is in there, like stirring things up and getting Olaf Scholz to side with him, I imagine. Quote, at the Elysee, we affirmed that the participants came with full knowledge it was going to be discussed and that many leaders expressed themselves neither for nor against this perspective. So a lot of people sitting on the fence still, which is great. That's strategic ambiguity. So don't say anything. So actually, we're not going to say, because that allows it to happen going forward. So that's to not say anything is almost as good as to say it's not off the table. Bear that in mind. So those who haven't committed, that's actually not that bad. It's the people that commit to not doing it is a challenge. Now, I don't know how much longer I can keep this Francophile position going where, like, French are awesome. Emmanuel Macron saying all the right things. So glad they've come to the party. But there's stuff like this. I can't verify the provenance of this claim or the accuracy. But it says here, this French TikTok says Emmanuel Macron gives a response to Putin that he's preparing several military, bits of kit. And here is a train full of French military kit. The inference is, or the implication, sorry, is that it's going to Ukraine, and that's a whole bunch of French kit there. Nice. And indeed, France have handed over the Ralek F3 non-contact fuses to Ukraine for Caesar SPG. So these are kind of not quite airburst, but they explode above the target. The Ukrainian gunners will be able to detonate shells before they reach the ground. For trench warfare, this is what is needed. So then it has a larger blast radius. Sometimes if you send a shell into the ground, it soaks up all the explosive all the explosive charge, really. And you do have some kinetic impact there, but sometimes you need to explode them before they reach the ground so that artillery can have a much greater blast area. And if that you've got people in trenches, that will go down into the trenches more than going into the ground, maybe by the trench, and not doing quite so much damage to people and stuff within the trench. And so these fuses, I think, are really important. And it's great that French are providing them for, I guess, their Caesar SPGs. Good stuff. Czech National Security Advisor Thomas Podjar clarifies that funding for President Petr Pavel's initiative to supply Ukraine with 800,000 artillery rounds only covers the first batch, despite pledges from 18 countries. This isn't bad news or anything. This is just the reality of the situation. So they've actually got 1 million shells that have been bought, or at least money has been pledged towards the acquisition of 1 million shells, and money has come through to Czechia for 300,000 of those shells, and I think they're going to be delivered pretty much imminently. But of course, there's a big difference between people pledging and then money in a bank account. And international movement of money isn't a case of like, I don't know, Estonia phoning or Latvia phoning up Czechia and saying, "Oh yeah, we'll give you 100 million spondulis," and then Czechia going, "Okay, brilliant. When can we have them? Hang on, I'm just on my app now. Hang on, fingerprint. Right. Okay, is that 100 million spondulis? Yeah. Okay, go. Right, that should be in the account in about 5 minutes. So just keep checking, keep refreshing, and then you should have that 100 million spondulis. Let us know if it doesn't go through." Or like going down a bank, getting the cash out of the bank and saying, "Hey, I'll be there. There's a flight there soon. I've just got to buy a bigger suitcase. But once I pack all the dosh in there, we'll be you. It's just a couple of hours down to Czechia, and I'll hand over the cash to you personally, and then you can go and buy them. In fact, I'm sure you've already got them in the warehouse, and you've been given them on credit, and then you can fling that cash over to India." Fabulous stuff. Okay, I think Ukraine will have these by what 4 o'clock? 4 o'clock this afternoon. That's not what happens, right? So you pledge money, and then a country has to go and find that money somewhere from some budget, for some cash pool, I don't know. And then that takes time, and then you have to transfer that somehow to Czechia, and then Czechia has to go to India or Turkey or wherever, and then transfer that money to them, and then they get the stuff, and then that has been all those shells are, I presume, transferred to Czechia when they're then transferred to Ukraine. So this takes a long time. So the fact that 300,000 shells have already been acquired effectively, or at least the money is there for those, I think is phenomenal already. And you will expect that money to kind of trickle through eventually for the entire million shells. Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna has announced a new military aid package and the signing of a security agreement with Ukraine. Tsahkna has made the announcement at a press conference following a meeting with the foreign ministers of the Baltic states, Ukraine, and France in Vilnius on March 8th. So this is really great. France again involved. That's the Baltic states and Ukraine, and it's not anyone else. It's not the US. It's not Germany. It's not just the Baltic states. France is there. This goes back to, like, my goodness, Emmanuel Macron is a renewed human and leader. Quote, we're going to sign a bilateral agreement between Estonia and Ukraine for long-term commitments. When we sign a bilateral agreement between Estonia and Ukraine, we promise to commit to allocate 0.25% of GDP per year for military support. And this is going back to the Estonian, I think it's the Estonian or is it the Lithuanian report that came out saying, look, if we all provided 0.25% of our GDP to Ukraine for the next 4 years, Ukraine should easily be able to win this war. And so Estonia are stepping up and saying, look, we are going to do this. Who else is along with us? So they're leading by example. Fantastic stuff there. Ukraine is to receive 6 billion euros from the EU's 50 billion aid package in March. So that's this month. At some point on February the 28th, the EU Council approved the multi-year 50 billion euro Ukraine facility aid package. Zelensky visited Turkey yesterday, met with Erdogan, and visited a shipyard that is building 2 stealthy Ada-class corvettes for Ukraine. It's incredible. So actually Turkey is getting on and building a couple of ships for the Ukraine's navy that presently has very few ships, if any. The Ivan Mazepa and the Ivan Vyovsky, these 100-meter, 2,000-ton ships, so about the same size as the ship that has just sunk, the Russian ship that was just sunk. Utilize low observable technologies in addition to constructing the vessels. Ukrainian personnel training is underway. So that's incredible. And it shows how Turkey, and incidentally, Erdogan's just announced that the local elections that are going to take place soon are going to be his last elections. So that is pretty big stuff. So Republicans who support Ukraine are hoping to break the deadlock and release funding. NBC claims the deal could be a part loan. So this is significant that they are trying to find ways around the impasse in Congress. However, it is kind of moving to a loan-based agreement. I don't know what the details would be, other than I think the loan stuff would be not for the military aid. So as no report says, House Speaker Mike Johnson and key House committee chairman are working on an alternative Ukraine aid package to address concerns among Conservatives. I think the State of the Union address has got some people moving, and I think starting with that and leading with that and being so strong on that and having somewhat bipartisan support, I think just we've possibly got to a point, America's possibly got to a point where there is just an overwhelming, well, there is a consensus, there is a majority of lawmakers who want to get this through. Preliminary plans include treating some non-military aid as a loan, with economic aid supporting Ukraine's government and long-term rebuilding efforts. Russian assets seized through sanctions could serve as collateral, and a loan program might have a generous repayment system. This approach aims to address conservative opposition to further US funding for Ukraine, with concerns over the use of taxpayer dollars without a clear long-term plan. The proposed aid package could be ready for consideration after the government shutdown deadline on March 22nd. Do you know what? Go for it. And if it gets that military aid through, then I would say that's a good bit of bipartisan. I can't think of the word. What's the word? MS Brain here. I had to pause that then. Compromise. Compromise. So that is, I think, a possible way forward. Now, we're moving on to Taurus here. This is a speech from opposition leader the CDU, so the Christian Democratic Union in Germany, Angela Merkel's previous party or former party. The potential next German Chancellor Friedrich Merz delivered a fiery speech yesterday night in Stuttgart, says Tendar. I translated the call message. Since I've been saying this for years and even carry the message in my signature, I approve this message 100%. Okay, let's see what your man has to say. So, and because it is so recent, let me add this. You will possibly receive it the same way as I do. The SPD, so they're the current ruling party in the coalition, is currently changing its strategy into this question, the Taurus question. Until now, the strategy was, quote, we cannot deliver because it requires German soldiers in Ukraine. So remember, that's what Olaf Scholz says. This claim has been disproven. The exact opposite has been proven. And now comes the next claim. The usage of the weapon is so unsafe that it might result in an escalation of the war. And then they tried to turn this matter into a question between peace and war. Ladies and gentlemen, we know from history, from ancient world up to today, Cicero brought it down to this sentence. Si vis pace para bellum, if you want to preserve peace, be ready for war. And today we have to address Putin and say, if we want peace, then the aggressor must lose. And Ukraine must win, or we all in Europe lose. I mean, goodness me, this is hugely important, and it's showing that there are many in the German Bundestag who want tourists to go to Ukraine. Now, let's add this to that. This has now been kind of formalised. There was rumours about this. UK Foreign Minister David Cameron stated that London is ready to help Berlin solve the problem of the supply of Taurus missiles to Ukraine. The proposed solution involves Germany supplying Taurus cruise missiles to the UK, and in return, London would provide additional Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. So that's a ringtausch, the kind of rotation. You give us stuff and we'll give Ukraine stuff. Now, okay, they're not going to get Taurus, they get Storm Shadows. But one, they need Storm Shadows, and we also can't give all of our strategic reserves of Storm Shadows. For some reason, we don't seem to have put an order in to MBDA for them. So this is a way around that, but also it means that the UK will be upgrading their own defensive or their own military capabilities by upgrading from Storm Shadow to Taurus. The proposal responds to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's refusal to directly supply missiles to Ukraine. The next meeting, so that's really good news. Let me know what you think about that. The next meeting of the Ramstein format will be held on March the 19th at the airbase in Germany. The press service of the US Air Force in Europe states. That's really good news that all of those nations will be getting together to do that. Right, moving on to a few Russian bits and pieces. A raid on migrants took place in Wildberries warehouse in Yekaterinburg. So Wildberries is this sort of big retail entity in Russia that appears to be employing a lot of migrant workers. Security forces raided a warehouse in the Koltsevo micro-district. As a result, more than 30 people were sent to the military registration and enlistment office for registration. So this is their way of building up troop numbers, of mobilizing. It's this crypto mobilization. India has revealed a large network of human trafficking. Russia lured people into employment, says Reuters, and then forced them to fight against Ukraine. Remember, there was a Guardian article that also talked about this. India's Central Bureau of Investigation found that approximately 35 Indians travelled to Russia as part of the scheme. That might not sound like an awful lot, and that's not saying that's a total amount of Indians, but if Russia are doing this in a number of countries, then they are getting meaningful numbers of troops to fight for them in Ukraine. Human traffickers operating in several states of the country, they searched for people on social networks. And then finally, this is from Tendar, saying the same, and this is his speculation on the top, so take it for what it is. Russia and its lesser minions are never tired to claim that Russia is having a huge amount of manpower. But this is only an illusion. Instead, Russia has severe manpower problems and does not even shy away to use human trafficking to fill the ranks, not even from using Indian or Chinese foreigners who get lured with false hope to Russia only to be sacrificed at the front lines in Ukraine in senseless meat waves. This incident using Indians is only the latest chapter. War is popular in Russia, but only as long as minorities, criminals, and foreigners bear the brunt of the losses. Putin knows that he can't tap into the Moscow or St. Petersburg. He needs to have the war as far as possible away from these cities, and this is exactly why it's necessary to bring war exactly to those cities. In the meantime, the countries in the so-called global south better advise their citizens not to go to Russia unless they do not want to be part of some FPV video with their terrified face being the last thing they do before leaving this world. Okay, so maybe a little bit rhetorical there, but the idea is that if Russia were in such a good position in terms of being able to fill their ranks, get the mobilization, get the barracks full of the training barracks full of new soldiers and new recruits. If that was not a problem, and they could just endlessly supply the front line with fresh Russian recruits, you wouldn't be seeing this. They might not be the biggest numbers of people here. We've got 35 being mentioned, but there are some claims there are 14 to 15,000 Nepalese fighting for the Russians. I don't believe that personally, but a significant number of Nepalese are apparently there. So you add all these together, and you only get that. It becomes meaningful. When you only get that, Russia only finds they have to do that if they are in the position where they need to do that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this. So I think this is a good indication that Russia is finding it difficult to get boots on the ground in the same way that Ukraine is, especially with the number of body bags that must be going back to Russia, or maybe the lack of body bags as they just say people are missing rather than admit that they have been killed. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care. Speak soon.